So, guys, one of the things that Aaron queried me upon yesterday was the number of dials that I thought was achievable within a 8-hour day. And the comment that Aaron had was about the volume that I ascribed to a successful key performance indicator was 500 dials. And one of the things that came as a consequence of that discussion was a realization that I think I want to communicate with you in respect of how you're thinking about optimizing for your objective, which fundamentally in respect of where you're at within your journey is setting. So appointment setting, I mean by that, the more appointments you're able to set, ultimately, the more goals that you would have achieved within the company. So if anyone else who's watching is at that stage of their journey, or you're part of a team, or you manage a team that does appointment setting, if you do any level of outbound, that's a big part of the journey. I say outbound, even if you get inbound appointments or inbound leads, you need to still set appointments up with the leads that come in. So in any event, it applies to any aspect of any sales team. So what I want to indicate with that is that for all of you here on the call, Aaron, Kalen, Evan, Riaz, you want to build out a data-driven sales process. So I think people hear that, but they don't actually know what it means in practice. So first of all, I just want to awaken you to the importance of having data to drive your decisions as opposed to gut. Gut instincts serve you only in the early and nascent stages of your sales development journey. But beyond that, data or lack of data and filling in data with your feeling as to what happens will ultimately mislead you. This, of course, relates to some of the challenges that we've had, Riaz, when I'm asking for, of course, specific data-driven points. And what I want you all to get into the headspace of is beginning with data, because it will help then you understand where you're at in your journey, and then fundamentally, as a consequence, drive better results as a consequence of just having access to the data. So one of the things, of course, I talk about is that what isn't measured cannot be managed, because then you've got no real measurement of your true success versus ultimately where you think you're at. So practically speaking, what does that mean in terms of the process? So first of all, you want to map out, of course, your KPI. So we spoke about internal KPIs and then company KPIs. So an internal KPI that you might have as an example, okay, I've got an 8-hour day. A KPI that I've got is to, and it can be an arbitrary KPI, which would be, okay, great. I want to generate in an 8-hour day, 8 appointments. So what you need to begin to do with that in mind is you need to map out what you actually, so this is where mapping out becomes important. Map out how you spend your 8-hour day, map out the activity, of course, that relates to generating the appointments, and then identify based upon the way that you map out every single aspect of your sales process. And what tends to happen when you map each bucket out, people don't tend to think deeply enough. You think with breadth, but you don't think with depth. So your breadth of thinking typically is something to the effect of, cool, I need to spend more time on the phone. Amazing. And that's great. And that's probably a given. But when you think about being on the phone, how deep are you going in terms of ultimately every single aspect that relates to being on the phone? So how can I optimize the ultimately so what you want to do is, of course, time every aspect of every single part of your day, identify where the highest leverage activity is, seek to expand the time spent in that bucket, but then also look at the depth of the time spent in that bucket. And once you've identified every aspect, so you might say, great, I'm going to spend some time on the phone, I'm going to spend some time sending follow-up emails, I'm going to spend some time reporting about what happened on the phone, and then sometimes going to be spent in, let's say, communication. So that might be 4 parts of your day, and that might be, let's say, 2 hours each. Obviously, if it's 2 hours each, you need to have an 80-20 split. So you say, right, the constraint that I have is that I spend too much time, let's say, with reporting, and that's not allowing me to have enough time on the phone. So then the depth of that would be, how can I double my productivity when it comes to reporting? Because that's a constraint that is limiting my ability to be on the phone. And the way that you can identify that being even a constraint is to have a Pomodoro and see how long it takes you to download a call from, for example, the sales CRM that we use, transcribe it, upload it, log it. And if you see that that process, for example, per call, per successful call, takes you, as an example, 7 minutes. And by the way, if you don't know this metric, then there's a problem within itself. The next thing you want to optimize for is to call. How can I make that how can I take that 7 minutes to 3 minutes? And then if I'm logging 4 appointments a day, That means I'm saving 4 minutes per appointment. That means it's 16 minutes per day. That means it's more than an hour per week. That's 4 hours per month. So that's an example of a constraint that is limiting your ability to be on the phone. So you want to optimize by minimizing the time spent on secondary tasks. Okay. So that would be an example of a constraint that is actually limiting your ability to generate appointments. And there's going to be different constraints. The typical thing that people go to that ultimately is within their sphere of control in their appointment setting, they typically complain, for example, about the admin that's associated with the reporting and the feedback and the communication. So then the onus is on you to really think about, and not enough people spend time thinking about it. How can I maximize the returns that my associates, my team, my superiors, my managers get in respect of the data that they need? How can I maximize their value but minimize my time input? And that's where there might be hacks or processes. And it can be something as granular as, right, if I keep, for example, a separate browser, if you're using Chrome, then you could maybe say Firefox is where I do all of my reporting because it will save me having to log in, log out, open up a new tab. I'll just open it up and all of my specific tabs will be there and all of the platforms that I need for reporting will remain there because I save increments of time. So that's just a simple example of something you might experiment with, but it's worth investing the time to ultimately speed up that process. So there's going to be different constraints as part of your process that you guys are going to be in charge of. Another classic example, one of the things that Aaron and I spoke about was, okay, and this is where measuring becomes important. I said, look, it should be realistic for you to do 500 dials in a day. And Aaron said quite rightly that I don't think that's realistic. But then when you run the math and you think about and you identify the constraint, if you run the math on, well, how many numbers with a power dialer should I conceivably be able to dial in 1 minute, assuming that I'm not connecting with a decision maker? If I allow, and this is where it becomes to become really interesting. To identify that, I need to see what actually happens. How many dials am I making per minute? And that the actual contingent factor that sits upon that is how many times do I allow the phone to ring out? Do I allow 7 rings or do I allow 20 rings? How many rings do I allow per dial? And what does that mean in terms of how long do I wait before I get a pickup? And is there an inverse correlation between, well, if I look at all of my successful appointments, all of them pick up within 3 rings. So if I'm getting outside returns within 3 rings, why am I even waiting 7 rings? So if I reduce my 7 rings to 3 rings, immediately my throughput increases, and that could increase the quality of my outcomes by simply decreasing the number of rings. Oh, also, I find that when I sit between dials, there's a time delay because the dialer setup system says that there's 30 seconds. Is there a way to reduce that to as minimal as possible? Maybe then the constraint becomes my cognitive ability to do things in the time that I need ahead of the next call. Is there a forcible delay? Is there any way to speed it up if I just play with the dialer? In 1 minute, for example, if you only ring 3 people, which is one dial every 20 seconds, assuming that it's 2 rings per 2 seconds between rings, and you allow, for example, 5 rings, that means it's 10 seconds for 5 rings. 3 rings could, 10 seconds for 5 rings, 12 seconds for 6 rings. That means every minute you should conceivably do at least, let's say, 4 dials. 4 dials per minute times 60 is 6 4s are 24. It's 240 dials per hour. So then the number 500 doesn't become that inconceivable. Now, if you look at that further still, what we're optimizing for is quality of conversation. So then, therefore, rings or dials is, of course, the secondary metric. The true metric is number of people that we connect with, as well as then time spent on the phone. So what happens is that most salespeople don't think about every single granular aspect of every part of the sales journey. And if you just seek to optimize every single piece that sits around you having quality conversations, you can typically increase the actual time spent on the phone and allocation that you have for spending time on the phone. So look at all of the areas that surround every single aspect of the process, identify your constraints within your process. And there's all kinds of constraints that you're not even potentially aware of. How quickly does your computer load up? How quickly do you open up new tabs? Do you spend time fannying about? Have you timed this stuff? Have you actually compared and benchmarked once you've identified every single aspect of your sales process? Have you then said to one of the sales team, well, in theory, we should be doing the same thing. These are all of the buckets that I see. How much time does it take you to do all of these things? Oh, wow. It takes you 1.5 minutes to get your stuff transcribed and uploaded and sent across. It takes me 9 minutes. Can you show me what you're doing? Because you might help me save 8 minutes per call, ultimately recorded and logged. So then when you start, so in doing it once for yourself, you help the entire team as well, because then the team can collectively begin to map out every single element of the sales process that you're directly in control of. And then you can identify time spent in each bucket. And then the whole team benefits because then you can begin to run comparisons and you can optimize based upon the relative strengths of each individual within the team, because everyone might have a slightly different way of doing things. But if you crowdsource the way that you all do things, you can optimize for the quickest process possible between the team. And then all of a sudden, you might say that by just working on our processes a couple of days, we went from $200 an hour to $290 an hour. And now, Deepak, as a consequence, we're generating 3 new appointments a day where we weren't generating them before, simply because we worked on everything that surrounds the call. Is this making sense, guys, what I'm talking about with identifying the relative constraints? Now, as you continue up that ladder, what you'll often find is, so let's go through it again. You want to build a data-driven sales process, and most people think about sheerly the appointments and the time on the phone, but it's way, 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 way more than that. It's everything that sits around it. So build a data-driven sales process is the goal. To do that, you map out every single aspect of your sales process. Then you time everything based upon every single aspect of the process. And I mean covering the minutiae of the sales process. I mean downloading something and uploading it onto HappyScribe. I mean then making sure that the actual transcript makes sense because you want to edit stuff that maybe the end decision maker wouldn't make. I mean then reporting it and making sure it's logged. They are three, for example, singular points. Downloading, uploading, putting it onto SoundCloud and HappyScribe, transcribing it and editing it, and then sharing it with the team. There's three points as an example. So if you think about it, there should be maybe 30 points in terms of your day, in terms of all of these steps and processes. Then you log time against it. And then you say, Riyaz says, Aaron, this is my steps. These are your steps. Can we all agree on uniformity of steps? How much can people just log how much time you take to do this shit? Oh, wow. Riyaz is great at this. Evan's great at that. Let's just swap notes and let's optimize all of our processes. So by timing everything, you identify your constraints. Once you identify your constraints, you seek to optimize every single element of that process. And then you can sense check your results against that process, because what you'll have is a before, my general ability to acquire appointments and leads. And then once you map out the constraints and improve the constraints, there should be a corresponding return on investment on your increased volume of appointments. Now, what will happen if you want to take it even further is that you will, as a team, have 3PR, which is third party reliance. Deepak, it's the quality of the list. It's the quality of the information that we're given. It's this, it's that. Expansion mindset. If you're a salesperson, why don't you bring that inside your scope? Just because the team around you aren't ready, and maybe they are, maybe they're not, it's irrelevant. What you can bank upon is self-reliance. I can be ready. So why don't I then go, and we got these 6 points here. So point number 6 is identify any third-party reliance that you have and map out their process. Map out their process, and then you can then, let's think about it. So Deepak, I'm reliant on the quality. So a classic case if you're cold calling, a classic case, for example, if you're dealing with leads that are coming in, identify the lead source and then see where you can, to begin with, learn bits and aspects of their process, and you map out every single aspect of their lead generation process, and they'll probably have some form of process, so you can identify what that process is. You can see how long it takes them to generate the, for example, lists that you need in your case, gentlemen. You can identify constraints within their process. You can then sense check to find ways to optimize that process. And you can even, if you want to, include that process in your process. So the self-reliant salesperson, really, if you think about it, says, well, I learned how to scrape all of the numbers. I learned where their source came from, and it felt to me ultimately net more productive if I could just build lists for myself. So now what I do is I wake up an hour or two earlier, just on a Monday, and I build all of my lists for the week. And I build all of my contingencies for the week. And when there's an issue, rather than going to the lead generation department and submitting a request or submitting a ticket, I just go and I find it's quicker for me to be able to build out a specific list myself. But I seek to get the knowledge from them because there's things that I don't know about how they've optimized. And then over time, you can become a self-generating lead generation machine because you look at not only your own process, but you look at what's on your left, what's on your right, what's above, what's down, and you slowly, if you think of it in terms of concentric circles, or not even concentric circles, you think about it of this being your no, yeah, we can say concentric. You have a position of overlap. What you want to do is encroach on their area so that you can begin to have leverage and power over every single aspect of that process. Because the end consequence is that you're able to generate more appointments. So get more granular with the aspects of your day. Use the technology and tools that are available to you to increase your throughput, your ability to shove volume through the system or to reduce time taken to produce that volume of lists and to optimize every single aspect of the technology, the tools, the equipment, the processes. And again, if you keep building in that, it relates to every single aspect of your headspace and your focus. If you're in an area where, for example, there's background noise, then maybe you need white noise to cover the background noise because that creates consistency of focus. Maybe you need noise cancelling headphones. Maybe you need to turn your laptop around so that you have just white walls. Maybe you need to close doors. So begin to identify every single aspect of your sales process because it's also environment, it's also getting to the headspace, it's also triggers. And as you begin to identify and map out every single potential, every element, you can then identify where your constraints are. You know what? I sit in a place in my home where I'm getting disturbed every day. So maybe when I'm actually on the phone, I should put a fucking sign up on the room saying don't disturb because it's dialing time. Maybe because humans and the body likes routines, maybe I need to ensure that I'm dialing every single day at the same single time so I'm cognitively prepared for it, like Pavlov's dogs. And I know that I don't give a shit. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. every day, guys, I'm going offline and I'm dialing. And I need to ensure that I've got 1,000, 2,000 numbers ready for my 2 hours or my 3 hours of power dialing. I turn off WhatsApp, no interruptive messaging, and I do that every single day to optimize for the greatest return. If you're in sales and you're not doing these things, some people call it power hour, some people call it the power hours. You can then also map out, well, I'm doing 1 Pomodoro or 3 Pomodoros for my dials. I can't leave my desk until I've done 10 Pomodoros, which is 20 times 10, so 200 minutes, because I know that that optimizes for the best outcome, which is 10 appointments a day. So if you work on all of these aspects of your sales process, you'll discover separate to being on the phone, you can just get to the phone and be on the phone so much faster and so much more effectively than anyone else. And this is why I say that oftentimes he who has the best car doesn't win the race. It's he who gets to the car the fastest every day can win the race because he's often that much further down the road by the time the other person gets on the phone. So top performers do everything they can to build as much possible time on the phone without interruption. So let's go through now your key things that hit home for you guys and what you think you'll apply based upon what we've just discussed. Who would like to go first? Riaz, go for it.
Um, Definitely going to be timing those things because I think if I think about it, my reporting does take a little long. Uploading the calls, transcribing the calls, and that reporting, it does take a bit long. And then having to listen to the call again to make sure the transcription is right. So I got to find ways to kind of like streamline that
Okay.
because I noticed that, well, especially when we're having calls where the call is long, then your numbers does suffer. Then the numbers does suffer. Then those little things actually then come into play. Those little things. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Amazing. So figuring out how you can optimize your reporting process could actually lead you to
Without,
generating.
yeah, without actually like, kind of like making the call shorter. So
Yeah.
try to keep the calls going longer and maximize the time or minimize the time on the other things. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you, Riyaz. Let's go to Evan now.
Yeah, using depth of analysis to the breadth of analysis and taking a more numerical approach to your progress and identifying the factors that influence output, like maybe starting at 9 a.m. instead of 10 a.m., but getting those power hours in. And instead of caring about the results, which I think for Kaylin, this is probably quite useful to you, don't think about the results, obsess over the process and don't care about the results because the results will come by default if you only think about the process and don't care how they're going to respond on the phone.
Mm, mm.
That's my main takeaways from.
Amazing. Amazing. Great. So depth over breadth and getting
Mm.
really scientific with your process and saying, am I approaching this like a data scientist or am I just doing it by gut? You should sell with gut when you're on the phone. So we've got the performance, but then everything else you should approach like a data scientist and say, okay, when am I performing and when am I being a data scientist?
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
data scientist will allow me to become the great performer and not the other way around. I can't be a performer when I'm going through my reporting and these other pieces. I've got to approach it like a data scientist and I've got to chop, slice, and dice so that when it comes to showtime, I can then enter the circus and be the amazing guy on the phone and say, "Hey, what's up, my man?" But outside of that, I'm scientific. Amazing. Thank you, Evan. Aaron.
For me, it would definitely be identifying my constraints because I know that there's tasks that I'm doing that are taking much longer than they should because because I just don't know how to do them and I'm not familiar with the tools. So I think I could save probably over an hour or much more a day just mastering all of the tools that we're using.
Yeah, yeah, amazing, amazing. Okay, brilliant. So tool mastery for you could make a big difference in terms of your throughput. So amazing, that makes sense. And Kaylin,
Okay, so what I took away from this meeting is definitely the tools as well, because in legal we don't really use any tools as you guys do. But most importantly, preparation. You said take time in the morning on a Monday to prepare so that when you do come in, you're not spending time asking the next department to assist you with your errors that you have. So preparation is always best, and it also helps you to make the call more punctual. And once you're prepared, everything runs smoothly. So that's what I took away. So prepare yourself on a Monday instead of doing it earlier Monday before you start your day, instead of doing it throughout your day. And then when you look at it, it takes you more time preparing that list to report to
yeah,
lead, as you said. Whereas if you did it earlier, you have that time. It could take you an hour to just report a simple tool that you don't understand or a simple error, whereas you have that hour to make those calls. And like you said, 60 calls or 20 calls makes a big amount at the end of the week.
yeah, amazing, amazing, perfect. Well, thank you for that, team, and that's it for today.